Good afternoon, and welcome to the special edition of Coffee and Conversation. I'm Donna Shea, the Director of the Training and Technical Assistance Center here at UConn, and we're very pleased to be co-sponsoring this important opportunity to gain a better understanding of the proposed Transportation and Climate Initiative program. Before I turn it over to our speakers today, I wanted to give our co-sponsors just a brief opportunity to share about their organizations. First, I'd like to introduce you to Rebecca Hall from CDM Smith, who is the current president of WTS. Becca, can you share a little bit about WTS with us?
Yes, thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us. I want to begin quickly by thanking Donna and Regina from the UConn T2 Center for organizing this event and for running the technology. That's a huge help for us, and to our two speakers for being with us today. We really appreciate your time speaking about this important initiative. So WTS Connecticut is a professional development organization whose mission is to attract, sustain, and connect and advance women's careers to strengthen the transportation industry, with a vision of equity and access for women in transportation. Our organization has over 20 volunteers in Connecticut in the public, private, and educational sectors to help us achieve this mission. Our membership is comprised of a diverse group of transportation professionals, including men and women, engineers, planners, marketing coordinators, human resource representatives, and project managers. We typically host at least one event every month, which are open to both members and non-members. And some highlights for this year include our new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series and the 15th annual Transportation mini-series. So be sure to be on the lookout for our constant contact emails with details for registration and just some updates on what our chapter is up to. And if you don't receive those emails and you would like to join our email list, I will place my email in the chat and you can contact me after this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becca. We're so excited at the T2 Center to find ways to be able to partner with WTS to support your important mission. Our next co-sponsor is Sharon Okoye from the Department of Transportation. Sharon is a longtime friend of the T2 Center and is also the current president of COMTO. Sharon, why don't you share a little bit about the good work that COMTO is doing?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I want to thank the T2 Center and Department of Transportation for being part of this important initiative. And I'm very excited to hear more about the TCI program. Again, I'm Sharon Okoye. I'm a senior transportation engineer at the department. COMTO is a national advocacy organization with the mission of ensuring maximum participation in the transportation industry for minority individuals, including veterans, people with disabilities, and minority and women-owned disadvantaged business enterprises. And our mission is to seek to advance the needs of community of color. Our chapter was established in 2016, and we are building our organization's membership and partnerships, as well as strategically supporting career advancement for our membership through leadership training, professional development, and networking opportunities. Also providing resources and support for MWDBEs to increase their marketability and competitiveness in the transportation industry. We're also an organization that advocates, educates, and supports transportation-related legislation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. COMTO is celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, and I encourage everyone to go to our national website, comtonational.org, to see what we have planned to commemorate our anniversary, and also learn more about the organization's benefits. Right now we have a membership of 25 members, and we're seeking to grow our membership here in Connecticut. So we look forward to being a resource for everyone. Thank you, Donna. Back to you.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate it. Well, without any further ado, we're delighted to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Commissioner Katie Dykes. Since February of 2019, Katie Dykes has been the Commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP. Katie previously served as chair of the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, which is PURA, and as deputy commissioner for energy at Connecticut DEEP. Prior to joining DEEP in 2002, Katie served as deputy general counsel for the White House Council on Environmental Quality and as a legal advisor to the general counsel for the U.S. Department of Energy. And we're very happy to have her back in Connecticut. Deputy Commissioner Garrett Eucalitto joined the DOT as deputy commissioner in January of 2020, bringing nearly 15 years of experience in transportation and infrastructure. Garrett comes to us after holding various positions. Most recently, he served as the Transportation Program Director at the National Governors Association in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he was the Undersecretary for Comprehensive Planning and Intergovernmental Policy at the Connecticut Office of Policy and Management. And most importantly, he's a native of Torrington, Connecticut. So we're very delighted to have you both with us today. And I'm first going to turn it over to Commissioner Dykes.
Great. Well, Donna, thank you so much for that warm welcome. And it's great to be with this group. I think it's just fabulous that you all have built this association and are convening together. And I'm thrilled to about what we're going to share with you, because I think it presents some real special opportunities for all of us as we're looking to tackle the climate crisis. We're pleased about this Transportation and Climate Initiative program and what it can mean for also helping to expand our transportation system to underserved areas, and also to help reverse some of the burden of air pollution on many vulnerable communities and communities of color around our state. So I serve as the commissioner at DEEP, and I couldn't ask for a more terrific partner at DOT than Commissioner Giletti and Deputy Commissioner Eucalitto. We are tackling this. The climate crisis, of course, is our most pressing issue among many, and the transportation system is now the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in our state. So it's so important to have partnerships like we do with DEEP and DOT to implement effective programs that can help reduce those emissions, improve our transportation system, and benefit communities. The TCI program is something that we're going to walk through in a lot of detail in this presentation, but the basics of it is that it's an environmental compliance requirement. This is an environmental program like many others that we manage at DEEP. It's at its most basic, it will require polluters to pay for their pollution. And by polluters, in the TCI context, I'm referring to companies that sell gasoline and diesel fuel, on-road diesel fuel at wholesale for use in Connecticut. And in this program, it simply requires those polluters, those companies, to purchase allowances and essentially pay for the tons of carbon emissions that are associated with the products that they're selling in our state. And then it takes that payment, that revenue, which will be about $1 billion over the next decade. And it turns around and gives us the opportunity to reinvest those dollars in clean transportation solutions that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, and improve our transportation system. So that's basically what it is, a requirement, having polluters pay and then taking that payment and reinvesting it in things that help better our environment and our transportation system. We go to the next slide. So one of the questions that we get about the Transportation Climate Initiative program is, why is the state of Connecticut seeking to implement this program right now? We're in the midst of a pandemic. We've got, an economic downturn that we're struggling with, at the same time. Why are we seeking to do this now? Well, the reason is that while we are meeting the needs of a pandemic, we are also facing an urgent need to address the climate crisis. If you think about our atmosphere sort of like a bathtub, we have been filling that bathtub with greenhouse gas emissions for decades and decades. And those, because of all of the greenhouse gas emissions, primarily carbon dioxide, that we have put into the atmosphere through combustion of fossil fuels, that has already caused our climate to change in very significant and very challenging ways. And so we already are expecting, because of what's already been emitted, that by 2050, we're going to be seeing much more frequent, stronger storms that are going to be impacting our communities, longer droughts. We are also going to be seeing up to 20 inches of sea level rise along the Connecticut coast. And that will mean both worsening storm surge during those storm events, but also nuisance flooding that's going to be occurring on blue sky days. We're going to, and just keep in mind that Connecticut, when you look at it, all of the insured property value across the state of Connecticut, we are second only to Florida in the percentage of our insured properties that are at risk of impacts from climate change, from sea level rise. So this is really important for public safety. It's really important. I know everyone on this Zoom will appreciate for our infrastructure operating in the way that we engineer it to, and also for our economy in protecting and preserving the value of properties along our coast and across our state. We're going to be seeing increased frequency of flooding. Again, for those who recall the impacts from Superstorm Sandy, by 2050, our expectation is that we'll be seeing those type of events every 5 to 10 years. And we'll see warmer weather, increased frequency of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, increasing by 5-fold, from 5 per year to about 25 per year by mid-century. So remember the bathtub. These are unfortunately impacts that are already locked in. And what we know is that the tap is still running. We're still pouring more greenhouse gas emissions into that bathtub. So it's into our atmosphere. So it's very, very critical that we not only act to prepare and make our infrastructure and our communities more resilient to the climate change impacts that we will be seeing by 2050, but also that we act as quickly as possible to turn off the tap and to reduce those harmful greenhouse gas emissions. Because scientists are telling us that if we don't make dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions within this decade as quickly as possible, we are going to be facing a scenario of runaway climate change with even more catastrophic impacts after 2050. So that might sound scary, but the good news is there are things that we can do to reduce those emissions impacts. And the TCI program is a very, very important thing that we can do here in our state. Next slide, please. So anytime we're talking about climate change, of course, and the opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, it's really important to also talk about air pollution. While the transportation sector and our cars and trucks and buses are contributing a significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions, they're also producing about 2/3 of the air pollutants that are making our air harmful to breathe. We know that especially along our transportation corridors like I-95, 84, the communities living along those transportation corridors are especially impacted by air pollution. And the primary driver, again, is our vehicles powered by internal combustion engines. So this is a really profound challenge for Connecticut. I think sometimes folks may not have the awareness of that Connecticut's air quality is especially and particularly bad in terms of comparison to other states, because we sit sort of at the tailpipe of the nation with air that's coming in from the Midwest that is already full of air pollution. So that makes it even more important for us to do everything that we can that's within control in our borders to help reduce air pollution. And the good news is that when we can do so, we're not only solving for climate change, we're also providing for healthier air for our kids, for families who are suffering from high rates of respiratory illness by the way, a major, underlying challenge for the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So that's it. So that's the opportunity that we have before us. If we can make great strides in shifting to lower emitting or clean forms of transportation, we can make a major dent in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, given that the transportation sector is the largest source, about 38% of greenhouse gas emissions. We know that gasoline and diesel fuels are the primary drivers of those emissions. So anything we can do to minimize combustion of those fuels is going to make a big impact. At the same time, motor vehicles account for 67% of air pollution, those air pollutants like nitrogen oxides that are contributing to poor air quality. So this is our win-win: address climate change and improve public health, improve the quality of the air that we breathe here in the state. Importantly, and I'll talk about this in a moment, we are not doing this alone. Connecticut is joining with three other jurisdictions to implement this program. If we go to the next slide, I can share that. So Governor Lamont has been a real leader and a real proponent of working on a regional basis to implement common sense climate solutions. He, through an executive order in September of 2019, he reconvened the Governor's Council on Climate Change, which includes about 24 leaders across our state, state agency commissioners, municipal leaders, business leaders. DOT is a member on that council, as well as other community members and stakeholders. And through that Governor's Council on Climate Change process, we have been looking at all kinds of solutions that will work for Connecticut to help reduce emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change. We released a report in January of this year that highlights 61 near-term actions, if you go to the next slide, that the state should prioritize to address climate change. And I encourage folks to go and take a look at that on DEEP's website. We're continuing to do a lot of work through the GC3 to further refine and explore additional measures that we need to take. But given the urgency, the need to turn off that tap, slow the introduction of more greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere, we identified these 61 near-term actions. And one of the 61 is a recommendation to adopt the Transportation Climate Initiative program. We have, of course, many requirements in state statute that mandate reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. These reflect Connecticut's long leadership in taking action to address climate change. That includes, of course, the foundational statute, which is our Global Warming Solutions Act, which requires us to reduce emissions 45% by 2030. We can't achieve that statutory required goal without major investment in clean transportation. We also have regulatory requirements under EPA Clean Air Act standards, as well as through multi-state commitments that we have made to deploy more and more electric vehicles and zero-emission vehicles across our state, again, to help achieve our air quality standards that we're currently not meeting. Next slide. And so with all of that as the background, that's, the governor, all these are different drivers for us to take action. And so the governor last December signed on to an MOU with the governors of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and the mayor of Washington, D.C., committing to seek to implement the Transportation and Climate Initiative program. We don't currently have the authority to implement this program. So DEEP is, the governor has introduced legislation into the General Assembly this year. In fact, we're going to have, the Environment Committee is going to be holding a hearing on this bill on Monday, this upcoming Monday. So we'll be glad to share more information about that, that hearing for those who may want to get involved. But these states have all committed to work together. We have demonstrated, throughout the last 2 decades of fighting climate change, We found great success when we work together with other states. It provides for more cost-effective compliance for entities that we're regulating. It helps to lower the cost of compliance. It helps to ensure that there's a level playing field. When all states are working together, we find that we just get, so many compounding benefits when we implement these programs on a regional level. The Transportation Climate Initiative builds actually on the model, a successful model that we initiated about 15 years ago for addressing emissions from power plants. And so we've been working together with these states to apply that model from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that applies to power plants to the transportation sector to address emissions from transportation fuels. And so with that, I'm gonna, with all that kind of explaining how we got here and why we're doing this, I'm now gonna turn over to Garrett Eucalitto to tell you a little bit more about what this program is, how it's designed, and how it's going to work and drive investment here in Connecticut.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to bring you through TCI 101. And so basically, how does TCI work? And that's a question I have been getting a lot when I talk to people. And I think at the most basic level, it sets a binding cap on carbon dioxide emissions from gasoline and on-road diesel fuel sold in our state, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and District of Columbia. And then that cap is going to get smaller each year, reducing or guaranteeing a 26% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions in our states from 2022 to 2032. And it's going to work in concert with other clean transportation investments and other complementary policies that our state and the other states are going to pursue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. And as the commissioner pointed out, it's modeled after what we've seen as a successful program with RGGI, as well as California's cap and trade program. Okay, so this goes a little bit deeper. So how do we make sure that pollution actually declines? And what we essentially do is we ensure that large gasoline and diesel fuel suppliers will have to hold emission allowances, purchase those allowances for the pollution caused by the consumption of the fuels they sell in our states. I'm going to refer to DC as a state because I used to live there. It's the 51st state in my mind. So each allowance represents 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide, and the total number of emission allowances available will decline each year, thereby resulting in less transportation pollution. And it's going to be quarterly auctions, and there's a lot of different compliance options. And the most important part to flag is it's going to be a uniform carbon price in our 4 jurisdictions, our 4 states, and additional states that join later on. And by putting this price signal out there, it's going to encourage innovation in the marketplace. The regulated entities are going to be incentivized to reduce the carbon content of the fuels that they sell. And that's going to be really important as we proceed. And that's why we see a lot of the private sector players in this market supporting this. We also put in place in this program a lot of protection measures for consumers as well as the environment. So we have in place, we're talking to some folks who work in the DOT space, the transportation space, so I'm going to call them guide rails along the highway, ensuring that the range of allowance prices stay within those guide rails. So we have something called the cost containment reserve, which you see there in the top right, essentially assuring that if the price of those allowances begins to go up beyond a certain trigger point, more allowances will be put into the bucket, into the budget, thereby reducing the cost of those allowances. Similarly, if the prices fall too low and we're not going to receive the carbon reductions, the greenhouse gas reductions that we need to see, they'll remove some of those allowances from the pool or the bucket. The other important part to flag is that bottom bullet there. we will have periodic program review, allowing for adjustments in public engagement. So if things happen in the economy that we are not expecting or we haven't modeled for, we, the states who control this program, will be able to pull together a review of the program, make adjustments, have public engagement, and readjust the program. So it's not like we are setting this on autopilot and letting it go. We're going to continue to be in the driver's seat for this program. So this slide here goes into a little more detail on what is going to happen, what's the emissions budget, what's the allowance prices, how much money will the state of Connecticut receive, and then what will we see at the pump. So again, this is regulated for the position holders, the people who own the fuel at the terminals. This is not regulating the gas stations, right? So, but if 100% of the cost is passed along down all the way down the supply chain to the consumer, we are expecting to see a slight increase at the pump. In the first year, our models are showing a 5-cent increase. That's if 100% of the cost is passed on to the consumers. We're trying to be conservative and assume that 100%. If the allowance prices are selling for the amount that we're expecting, you see that line, the second line down, the state of Connecticut in the first year of the program will receive $88.5 million for us to spend in Connecticut on projects and programs to do clean transportation, clean up our air, and reduce carbon content. And then as the program goes, as the emissions budget or the total allowances available decline, the prices will go up, thereby producing even more money for the state of Connecticut. So in the last year of the modeled program, we're expecting to see close to just over $117 million in that year in 2032 for Connecticut to invest in our clean transportation options. I want to go a little bit into the projected benefits here. And this infographic here, the team at DEEP has pulled together some fantastic infographics, which are on our TCI website, which has this and a whole host of other fact sheets. So we already touched on the 26% reduction, minimum 26% reduction in CO2 emissions from transportation sector. We touched on the revenues that will be generated for us to reinvest in clean transportation. We also talked a little bit about how tailpipe emissions have a negative impact on the health of our citizens. And us at the DOT, we're really proud to be a part of this program with DEEP because we recognize the impact that transportation has on the health of our residents. We also recognize the impact that past transportation investments have had on our communities. And this is an opportunity to correct some of those wrongs of some past infrastructure investments. But you can, by using TCI proceeds and just by the reduction in tailpipe emissions, we can avoid premature deaths and asthma by investing in specific type of investments to protect bikers and walkers. We can avoid injuries and fatalities from crashes. And this is not just in urban centers, it's all across the state, including underserved communities, those underserved by their transportation system. And lastly, macroeconomic benefits. It's a net positive impact for the GDP of our state, for income levels, for employment. I encourage you to go onto our website and download some of these additional fact sheets there. This great graphic here, and I'm going to go into a little more detail because this is a transportation audience. Sorry, Commissioner, I'm going to wonk out a little bit with them. So this is a really brief infographic on some of the types of investments that we could use the proceeds for. And it's really important to flag that we're not predetermining where the proceeds will be invested. It's going to be a discussion with the legislature. It's going to be a discussion with those communities most impacted by transportation emissions, most impacted by the lack of transportation options. It's going to be a discussion with councils of governments, and local governments. It is going to be a community effort to try to determine, one, how we invest the proceeds, what factors we use to determine that, and where we can get the most benefit for our state and for our residents. So one of the items that I want to talk about before going to more specific examples, air quality monitoring. We've heard loud and clear from a lot of the advocates who are focused on environmental justice that we need to invest more in localized air quality monitoring. So we have heard that from other states as well, that these proceeds do make sense to do some investments in air quality monitoring. So diving into a little bit more on some of the transportation options here you see on this slide. Let's start talking about them. So trails, obviously trails are a huge part of what makes Connecticut great. It's a great quality of life investment for our state. And there's a lot we can be doing to invest in trails. There's a lot of demand to continue to build out the trail investments there. Couple more related to bike facilities, sidewalk improvements. That is going to continue to be a focus of our department. We have our community connectivity grant program. We have our complete streets policy. TCI will provide even more funding that we can invest at the local level to make safer sidewalks, more accessible and ADA compliant curb ramps and crossings and sidewalks, as well as protected bike lanes or just separated bike lanes, things that we know communities want to see. That makes it safer for people to get around their communities without having to own a vehicle. Here, complete street image from down in Stonington. That's the type of thing that we know communities want to see. Roundabouts, this is one of those that when I bring up to non-transportation officials, they look at me like I have two heads. But I think it's really important to drive home that converting an intersection into a roundabout can help reduce crashes and collisions significantly. And it can also reduce emissions. We've seen studies that show that reduces emissions. So that's something that a type of investment we can make in places with high crash volumes where it's not safe for pedestrians to get through there, where we can make investments that passively reduce emissions for drivers without them doing anything different and without them even swapping out their vehicle. Electric vehicle bus conversion is a key one. We at the DOT want to convert our entire state diesel bus fleet over to electric over the next 12 to 15 years. That's a commitment we want to adhere to, we want to achieve, and we think we can do that. And TCI can help us even accelerate that further. The bottom one here, traffic signal modernization. Again, similar to roundabouts, folks on this call know the benefit of updating and modernizing our traffic signals to have them have detectors and be able to be synchronized to reduce idling and make it more seamless transportation flow. And lastly, EV charging infrastructure. That's going to be key as we see more automakers moving forward with investments and commitments to convert their entire model fleet over to electric. We need to make sure that we have enough EV charging infrastructure out there across the entire state. We know there are lots of communities that lack that fast charging capability in some of our urban centers, as well as in our rural areas that lack that. So this can help close those gaps in EV charging. Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up.
Terrific. So another, as Garrett mentioned, there's embedded within TCI, there's a real recognition of the opportunity and frankly, the obligation that we have to ensure that as we are investing in clean transportation solutions, that we're doing so in a way that prioritizes equitable approaches, meaning communities that are underserved by the transportation system need to be at the center of our investments. Similarly, communities that are overburdened by air pollution need to be at the center of our investments. And so the MOU that Governor Lamont signed with the other governors and Mayor Bowser includes a commitment to invest at least 35% of the proceeds that we receive from this program in supporting those two communities. Of course, Connecticut will retain full control over how we spend the dollars that the revenue that we get from the sale of the compliance requirement on fuels that are sold here in Connecticut. So we will be the masters of our destiny in terms of how to invest that approximately $1 billion of revenue over the coming decade. But we're not going to do it, in a silo or off in our, state agency offices. We are committed to include the consultation with an equity advisory board that will include residents of overburdened and underserved communities to give us input, to advise on decision making and outcomes. We're committing to ensure that there's transparency through annual reports of the investments that we make and measurement of those outcomes that we'll be sharing with all stakeholders so that we can ensure year by year as we participate in this program that we are working together with those communities that are overburdened and underserved on how we can deliver these clean transportation solutions in a way that will best fit their needs and provide maximum benefits. This is just, really a just critical insight. I think we have many years of a great track record of successfully reducing greenhouse gas emissions in many parts of our economy. But there's increased recognition that equity and environmental justice has to be more at the center of our climate and transportation solutions, especially as we recognize that many communities and communities of color, vulnerable communities, are going to be more exposed to the impacts of climate change going forward. So this is, I'm very excited about this part of the program. We have legislative language that, again, the hearing is coming up on Monday, but that includes the commitment to establish this equity advisory board and ensure that it has a seat at the table as these decisions are made and about how to invest that minimum percentage that will be allocated to overburdened and underserved communities. Next slide. Of course, as we've been rolling out this program and communicating with all kinds of stakeholders about it, we are also, frankly, encountering opposition. The oil industry which will be required for the first time to pay for the climate impacts that they're imposing on society, the air pollution costs that they're imposing on our communities. The oil industry is not embraced the program. There are ads, there are videos, there are lots of talking points that are being shared around the community, and I think it's just very important for us to be very direct in highlighting that a lot of the information that they're sharing is untrue. It's misinformation, and it continues a pattern and a practice of the oil industry in opposing any efforts to address climate change and utilizing misinformation as a tactic to prevent states and regulators from holding the oil industry responsible for the impacts that's imposing on our communities. So I'll just run through a couple of these myths because you are likely to hear them. One is that TCI is just a gas tax. So to be clear, TCI is not a gas tax. It is an environmental compliance requirement that will be imposed on the oil industry, on wholesalers of gasoline and diesel fuels. It is a market-based program. It sets a cap on the amount of carbon pollution that can come from these fuels so that we can meet our state mandated goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We do expect, and we have responsibly modeled what the impacts of this program will be on consumers, as we expect these fuel suppliers will likely pass on the costs of compliance with this environmental requirement to consumers in the price of their fuels. As Garrett mentioned, we expect that those impacts will likely be about 5 cents in 2023, and as the cap tightens, as we make that progress towards meeting our statutory carbon reduction goals, that the price will increase. We will expect this program could have an impact on consumer gas prices of about 10 cents per gallon by 2032. Our goal is not to you know, again, contrary to, so let me be clear, there's a lot of myths floating around that the TCI program will cause a much higher impact on gas prices, and that is not true. We have done extensive modeling with up-to-date assumptions about what those impacts will be. And in fact, if we were factoring in some of the announcements that have just been made in the last 2 weeks from manufacturers of you know, our auto manufacturers about their plans to shift to electric vehicles, you know, I think that our consumer impact scenarios would be even would predict an even lesser impact. But that said, we have responsibly modeled all of this, and the figure of 17 cents that's being promoted by the oil industry is not accurate, and it's based on an outdated and flawed scenario. Our goal with this program is not to achieve carbon reductions by increasing retail gas prices. We know that gas prices are at a pretty low price compared to where they have been in recent years. This is not the design of the program to drive up prices at the pump as a way to get consumers to shift their behaviors. What this program does is simply place a cap on the carbon emissions coming from the transportation sector, which we have to do if we're going to meet our economy-wide mandated target of 45% reduction by 2030. And the design of the program intentionally takes the revenue from the payment that polluters have to make and ensures that it will be invested in clean transportation solutions. That $1 billion of investment is going to be the workhorse of reducing emissions from this program. And that's where we expect to achieve those reductions. The TCI program, you know, another myth that folks are promoting is that it will make it harder for people to have, you know, it will compromise mobility, make it harder for people to get around. That's just simply not the case. Again, as I mentioned, that we have not designed this to disincentivize consumer fossil fuel use through higher prices. We see fluctuations, intraday fluctuations in gas prices of more than 5 cents per gallon. So again, the focus of this is on capping emissions for the sector and driving investments in clean transportation solutions. This is not a program that's just focused on electric vehicles. We know, you know, as Garrett mentioned, there is a whole host of different things that we can do to reduce carbon emissions in our transportation sector. That's really, really encouraging because it gives us a lot of opportunities to design solutions, again, through engagement with stakeholders, engagement with the equity advisory body, to allocate these dollars and make these investments in the things that are going to be most desirable, most impactful for the needs of our various communities across the state. And then, as I earlier mentioned, so, you know, Connecticut will have full control over how we invest the proceeds that we receive from participating in this program. There have been, again, myths that are being spread that we're going to be surrendering control over that to some kind of regional body or something of that nature. The regional aspect of this program is simply that we get the benefit of setting a uniform cap across the participating states. We can share the same auction platform where that gives the fuel suppliers a really easy place to manage their compliance with the program on a regional scale. But all of the dollars that Connecticut receives associated with the sales of those fuels in the state of Connecticut, that revenue will be fully within Connecticut's control to determine how to invest it. So again, this is sadly part of our jobs in making strides to address the climate crisis. Is that there are simply parts of our, you know, our society that have concerns around making these changes. But we know, and I have to underscore, that the costs of not taking action, the cost of not implementing this very, you know, well-designed program far exceed it will be so much more costly if we don't take action, and those costs are going to fall especially on our kids and on our grandkids. So this is a solution that will work. It's affordable. It's going to make a huge difference in our transportation system. It's going to open up so many opportunities for our communities. It's going to make our air healthier to breathe. It's so exciting what we have the possibility to do. And so I'm just delighted to have the time to share this with all of you today. We have shared the timeline here. Obviously, the most important step for TCI is to secure the support of the General Assembly so that we can get the authority that we need to work with the other states and move forward with this program. So Monday, again, is the hearing in the Environment Committee. We are, really optimistic that we will be able to persuade lawmakers that this program is going to be good for our state. I'm grateful for Governor Lamont's leadership in making Connecticut a charter member of TCI. Presuming that we do succeed in getting the authority to move forward with regulations, we would begin that reg process in the latter half of this year so that we could start participating in the first quarterly auctions for this program in 2023 and begin to make investments in clean transportation solutions towards the latter part of the budget biennium. So thank you all so much for your time today. There's a lot to talk about here. You can probably hear how passionate Garrett and I are about this program. It just makes so much sense. And I know, especially to have the chance to share what we're doing, this opportunity with the folks on this in this meeting. I think you all play a really pivotal role, and your input in this current process for seeking authority, but especially assuming we get authorization to move forward, your input in how these investments are made and delivering on clean transportation solutions will be so transformative. And so I just am grateful to have the time today.
Thank you so much, Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner. I think it was really important for you to share this information and also share the myths, because I think the misinformation is what will be problematic, certainly. I wanted to just take a few minutes, since we have a couple minutes, to look at the questions in our chat box. Thank you, Commissioner, for answering them. That's wonderful. But I'll just kind of go through, that way people can see what's been asked and what information is available. So the first one was, has DEEP or other agencies done any research on the impact of COVID-19 shutdowns on air quality? And you were kind enough to share that, yes, they have, and that you provided a quick summary of observed trends in 2020. And link to more of the analysis. So thank you so much. And we'll send a follow-up after the webinar to folks with some links to some of the resources that were shared in the chat box so that they have them. Thank you very much for that.
Hey,
then
Donna,
there was go ahead.
I just want to, on top of what the Commissioner Dykes put in there, I just want to flag, if people haven't seen on our website, we have traffic volumes posted publicly that are being updated. So from like January of 2020 all the way to today, our team at DOT is posting all continuous count station data. So if anyone, data nerds are out there, they want to see traffic volume by day at those specific locations, we're putting it on the public facing website. So.
Oh, great. Thank you for reminding me of that. And we'll make sure to include that as well. That's really good information. Deborah asked, will quantifiable goals be set in order to measure the benefits of the TCI program to minority and low-income communities? And you shared that, yes, there will be an equity advisory board that's set up, and you mentioned that in the presentation. There was a question about, does this tax affect all businesses or just fuel suppliers? And Garrett, you were speaking about that in your portion. Was there anything else you wanted to share in terms of that?
No, I mean, Commissioner, correct me or jump in if you want, but yeah, this is aimed at the position holders and who have gasoline and on-road diesel. That's it. So position holders in those tanks at the terminals, or a distributor who brings it in from a terminal from out of state and brings it into state, they would also have to comply.
Right. We designed this in order to, again, we want to make it as easy as possible for folks to comply with the program. So we're not imposing this regulatory requirement on, mom and pop gas stations. We are assigning this environmental compliance requirement on those folks working at the wholesale level to ease the cost of compliance.
Thank you. Do you envision, this is for Garrett, do you envision the DOT moving towards implementing project performance measures such as achieving reductions in VMT into decision-making?
That's a great question. I know there's a lot of discussions going on right now at the national level about how to reform the surface transportation programs. Both chambers are debating that, or will have to debate that, because we need to reauthorize those programs. I know the Biden administration wants to put in place new greenhouse gas performance measure rules that were put on hold by the Trump administration. So we are in constant talks with other states as well as our federal counterparts about that. It is something that we know that we need to begin to account for. And we can't accommodate everyone who wants to drive. We can't see a continuous growth in VMT. We need to see a reduction, and we need to continue to invest in our transit systems as well as active transportation to get people out of single occupancy vehicles. We need to have people move to our alternative modes. In Connecticut, we're built out. We can't, we're not like some states who have green fields and can build places. We're built out. We need to encourage density and infill in our communities, encourage walkability, encourage public transit usage.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I very much appreciate you addressing the messaging that's coming at the gas stations, because that's certainly one of our participants said that they were at the gas station and heard the ad about the increase in 17 cents a gallon. So thank you for addressing that that myth in your presentation.
Yeah, honestly, I have to say it is just shocking that we've dealt with this with power plants for years. We know that Attorney General Tong is part of multi-state litigation pursuing Exxon and other of the majors who have promoted misinformation, who have known about climate change for years, and to see that same playbook being applied in 2021 here in our state is just it's just reprehensible. And so I think that's why we want to just call it out and just be very clear about how that confusing messaging that's being spread.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. Joe is asking, why haven't other states signed on? Seems like maybe a larger pool would be a benefit in this.
That's a great question. So we actually have been in discussions with more than a dozen states over the last 2 years as we've been designing this program. There are 4 jurisdictions that have moved forward, including Connecticut last December, to seek to implement the program as a sort of starting phase. I think there's various reasons why different states, in terms of timing of their process or what have you, may have chosen not to take the first step towards implementation with us last December. But those states are continuing to be part of our discussions with Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island, and DC as we're designing the program, and that will facilitate their entry into the program later on. I will say, I've worked on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program for several years, and the experience that we saw there, Connecticut was a charter member when RGGI launched more than a decade ago, and we continue to see more and more states joining RGGI over time. Virginia just joined. We're seeing Pennsylvania is going to be coming into RGGI. So I expect that I'm very confident that as we lift off this program, that we're going to see its geographic footprint expand over time. But one other really important thing to say, the program works the same. Okay, it has the same effectiveness here in Connecticut, whether we have 3 states or 30. We will achieve those emission reductions, the 26% over the decade. We will achieve the $1 billion in investments, whether it's just a small number of states or it's a large number of states. So that's another thing that's really critical. But by doing this, we are able to help facilitate and leverage more states joining. Obviously, we get that compounding benefit of more carbon emissions being reduced.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that clarification as well. Just a few concerns maybe we can chat about that people have posted. One concern was the lack of existing bike and green infrastructure, putting a burden on lower income communities. Just certainly an important.
Yep, great point. And that's exactly what we want to do with these types of investments. We want to talk to those communities who are impacted, who are overburdened by air pollution today in a lot of our urban areas, and ensure that we can target these investments to make it safer for them to walk, to make it safer for them to bike. And you see the types of investments we're proposing in the budget this year, expanding bus hours in New Haven to 1 a.m. to ensure that people working second shift or working odd hours can use public transportation instead of owning their own personal vehicle. So that's what we need to be doing, is doing some more target investments like that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then Commissioner Dykes, you talked about this a little bit already, but someone mentioned their concern that Connecticut is taking the burden of the natural climate, where a large part of the country's pollution naturally flows over New England.
Right. So we have, we are a small state, right? Relative, if you think about greenhouse gas emissions are a global challenge. But we have to take responsibility for the emissions that our state is producing. At the same time, the leadership that we have been providing in establishing programs, proving out how you can cost effectively reduce carbon emissions in a market-based way. That's what Reggie did. That's what TCI is doing. By doing that, we are also paving the way and demonstrating and creating models that more jurisdictions can participate in. And so that lowers the cost of emission and climate change fighting technologies. There are so many benefits that we get and that, that we are providing through that leadership, not only taking responsibility for our emissions, but also helping to catalyze emission reductions that are occurring across the country and across the world. So that's very, very important. And again, I'll say with respect to air pollution, it is extremely frustrating that our air, when it's blowing across our borders, is already so dirty. We are pursuing a multi-pronged strategy to address this. Transportation is obviously 2/3 of the air pollution that we're responsible for generating here in our state. So we have to tackle this in a bigger way. That's what TCI will help us do. But we're also addressing emissions of NOx emissions and air pollution from power plants in our state, as well as pushing on EPA and other upwind states to have stricter controls on some of those fossil fuel power plants that are generating a lot of those emissions that are coming our way. So, trust me, it is a multi-pronged strategy, but we have, given where we are and how acute our challenges are, we have to press on every lever. And the good news is that doing so for air pollution in the transportation sector is also helping us meet our global warming solutions requirements to reduce the 45% greenhouse gas emissions in our state by 2030.
Thank you. We have just a few more, if you don't mind, one or two more questions.
We love talking about this.
Okay, great. So will part of this money be used to offer credits to better insulate houses and use cleaner appliances, especially for some of our low-income community?
Great question. Not this program, but the good news is that we already have programs in place funded through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and through a surcharge on customer electric and natural gas bills that are funding energy saving measures that you can take advantage of for your home or for your business. So I can put the link in the chat to energizect.com, which is where you can go to get kind of a one-stop shop of access to all of those energy savings measures. We are working really hard on, again, with equity at the forefront to ensure that those dollars and those programs are especially accessible to lower income families. It's a real priority. In fact, on Monday, I joined the governor at a press conference where we highlighted legislation that the governor has introduced to provide for, I love that I'm telling this to transportation people, a miles per gallon type label for your home or for your apartment. When you would never think of going to buy a car without knowing what its fuel economy is. but many of us are living in homes or apartments, and when you purchase or you rent, you have no idea, no way of knowing what the utility costs are going to be, or how well insulated or how efficient the appliances are. And so this legislation would, for the first time, ensure that prospective renters or home buyers can access either a special home energy label that gives you that information, or the last 12 months of utility bills for that property. So I think that kind of transparency will drive a lot of investment in energy efficiency, and it's especially important for lower income families who may be spending up to 20% of their monthly income on utility bills. So we're really excited about this proposal. And you've already got it there, energizect.com.
Thank you very much. And in the category of what could possibly go wrong, could suppliers take advantage of the pricing and pad the increase?
We have, so I will say in the context of the RGGI program, we have a lot of experience in carefully monitoring our markets, where, again, the wholesale suppliers, they're going to be purchasing allowances in quarterly auctions. Those allowances are what they will use to show that they've complied with the program. In the quarterly auctions, we will have a market monitor who will be reviewing the conduct in the auctions to the extent that we see a secondary market emerge, be able to review that as well. It's really, these markets have proven to be very, we've had no issues in the RGGI market that has been operating for power plants over the last decade. And I think, again, the benefits of having a large number of states and a large, all of Southern New England, DC participating, the bigger the market, the better we're able to protect it against any of those kinds of exercises of market power that could occur. So I think our experience has been that these types of competitive markets have worked really well, but we have implemented them in the power sector with careful safeguards to monitor that kind of activity.
Thanks. And our very final question, and thank you so much for staying a few minutes over. So since more and more vehicle emissions are being shifted from the vehicle itself to the electrical suppliers, how is that aspect being accounted for in this program?
Do you want to take that, Garrett? Or sorry.
Well, do you want to talk about the work you're doing on the grid and the RPS and all the, because yes, that is going to be something that, PURA and DEEP are actively working to ensure that we have lower carbon electricity out there.
Oh, there we go.
So,
yes, I'm sorry. I misheard the question. So I will say we have been looking at all these things comprehensively. DEEP just in December issued a draft integrated resources plan for our electric grid, and where we have been modeling out a plan to meet all of our energy supply needs for the state of Connecticut with 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. That's a target that the governor is seeking to enact into statute and make the law of the land in this legislative session. The good news is that Connecticut has already made significant progress in decarbonizing our electric supply. As we speak today, the equivalent of 65% of the electricity that's supplied in the state of Connecticut is being supported by renewables or nuclear, emission-free nuclear power generation. And by 2025, that percentage is going to increase to 91% as a result of a new offshore wind facility being built off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. We were able to invest in that project through an RFP that was conducted in the end of 2019, the largest renewable purchase in the state's history. So 91% carbon-free by 2025. That's where we are here in Connecticut. So, and we've been able to do that in a way, taking advantage of competitive RFPs to ensure that supply as affordably as possible. So that and I will say that so we've made that progress in decarbonizing our supply. Also, it's important for folks to know this, because you see this pop up, and often people ask me about this. electric vehicles are already just inherently more energy efficient. They consume less kind of energy overall than, or it takes less energy for them to move than an internal combustion engine. So you get efficiencies just because the equipment itself, the vehicle, is more efficient in converting energy to movement. And then couple that with the clean electric supply that we are securing here in New England means that we're going to, we're going to get a lot of emission reductions through electrification of vehicles. But it's something that we're planning for, and the IRP includes forecasts where we've predicted how many electric vehicles are coming onto the grid, so we can ensure that we're ramping up clean energy supply to meet the growing need for electric vehicles to be fueled from our grid.
Thank you so much. And thank you for allowing us to ask you all the questions we had in here. I appreciate your time today, and we will have the recording of this available on our website, so that way folks will encourage folks who weren't able to join to be able to have an opportunity to see your presentation. Thank you both very much. And thanks to everyone who participated. Hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for the opportunity.
Take good care.